As the sun rose over Mount Everest, Daniel Mazur and his team of climbers were just hours away from reaching the summit. After 7 grueling hours of climbing through ice and snow, Daniel could sense their hard work was about to pay off. Despite the freezing temperature of 10 degrees below zero, the morning light revealed clear blue skies, offering the perfect conditions for a successful ascent. As he dug his crampons into the ice, Daniel knew that the spectacular 29,035-foot summit was within their grasp. With renewed determination, he took a few more cautious steps toward the top of the world. At 7:30 in the morning, Mazur and his summit climb teammates, Andrew Brash and Miles Osborne, had climbed up to a narrow ledge called Mushroom Rock to take a break and offer each other some encouragement. As they looked out at the snow-covered peaks below, Mazur suddenly saw a flash of bright yellow to his left. Initially, he thought it might be a tent, but quickly realized that no climber would camp out at that altitude. The yellow blur moved again, and Mazur was stunned by what he saw. He couldn't believe his eyes. Lincoln Hall was sitting on the edge of a steep cliff, trying to change his shirt. He was wearing a thick snowsuit that was unzipped to the waist, and he had no hat, gloves, or sunglasses. Without any of the necessary gear for survival at such a high altitude, there was no reason for Hall to be alive at 28,000 feet. But he was right there, perched on the edge of the cliff, seemingly unbothered by the danger. As he pulled his frostbitten hands out of his shirt, he looked up at Mazur and said, "I imagine you're surprised to see me here." Hall had been alone on the mountain since 7:30 the night before. After a grueling climb up the North Ridge, he and his team reached the summit at 9 in the morning. Overjoyed by the stunning view of the Earth's curvature, they took victory photos before beginning their descent. But as they descended, Hall started to feel incredibly tired. He turned to one of the Sherpas he was climbing with and said, "I need to lie down. I need to sleep." Sherpas are the inhabitants of the Khumbu Valley, the national park surrounding Everest. Living at altitude for generations, they have developed a genetic tolerance for it. Guides and explorers hire them to help carry oxygen and equipment, as well as to provide safety on the summit push. Hall was a seasoned mountaineer with 25 years of experience under his belt, including a previous attempt to summit Everest in 1984. Unbeknown to him, he was now suffering from cerebral edema, a dangerous condition that occurs at high altitudes and causes the brain to swell. Symptoms include a stumbling gait, hallucinations, and eventually death. Despite his experience, Hall was unable to recognize the signs of his illness. The death zone is the treacherous area just below the summit of the mountain. It's incredibly steep and icy, making it necessary for climbers to use fixed ropes and ice axes to make their way to the top and back down. And due to the high altitude, climbers are particularly susceptible to illness in this area. Hall was struggling to make the descent from the peak to advance to base camp. His weakened state and the edema that had overtaken him made it difficult for him to cooperate, so 2 Sherpas had to lower him down between them, wasting valuable time. Meanwhile, the rest of the group with the leader Abramov continued on their way down. After 9 hours, Hall collapsed unconscious and could not be moved. It was 7 p.m., and as the darkness fell and the temperature dropped, everyone below knew that grim decisions had to be made. If the Sherpas stayed, they too would die. Following their leader's orders via radio, the Sherpas checked one last time for signs of life, but there was no response, as it is not uncommon for climbers to succumb to the cold and freeze to death in the mountains. Despondent, they covered his body with stones and collected his backpack, supplies, and extra oxygen tanks before making their way back to the high camp. Just hours before, another climber, a German man named Thomas Weber, experienced the same symptoms as Hall, then collapsed and died less than 20 yards from him. 10 days before, David Sharp, a climber from Great Britain, had been attempting a lone ascent of the mountain without Sherpas and collapsed with altitude sickness. It was reported that as many as 40 climbers passed him and failed to render assistance. Mount Everest is a dangerous mountain, with many experienced climbers knowing someone who didn't make it back. Dan Mazur lost two friends, Rob Hall and Scott Fisher, in the 1996 snowstorm that also claimed the lives of 6 other climbers. Their bodies, along with nearly 200 others, remain on Everest's treacherous slopes, frozen in snow and ice for eternity. Climbing Mount Everest requires a deep respect for the mountain, as there are times when you may need to step over a fallen climber's body to reach the summit. This grim reality serves as a reminder of the dangers of the mountain and the need to approach it with caution. As they stood near the peak on that chilly May morning, Mazur and his team members realized they had a tough choice to make. Should they call for help for Lincoln Hall and continue on their journey, or stay with him until rescue arrived? Mazur had reached the summit before, but for Brash and Osborne, who had spent a small fortune on the trip, it was a lifelong dream. In the end, Mazur knew there was only one possible decision. They would stay with Lincoln until help arrived. Hall was in a dire situation. He was disoriented, frostbitten, and precariously perched on a tiny snow-covered platform at the edge of the 8,000-foot Kangshung face. It was a miracle that he hadn't rolled over the edge during the night. Fortunately, the men arrived just in time and helped him back into his snowsuit. They shared their oxygen, lemonade, and Snickers bars with him, providing him with the sustenance he needed to survive. Mazur asked Lincoln Hall how he arrived at their current location, but Hall was unable to provide a clear answer. However, when asked for his name, he was able to respond with a grin, stating that his name was Lincoln Hall. Mazur was relieved to see that Hall was beginning to regain some coherence, but he quickly slipped back into hallucinations, rambling about a boat ride and attempting to remove his snowsuit. He even lunged for the cliff. Mazur quickly acted to prevent Hall from harming himself, grabbing him in a bear hug and tackling him onto the ice. As he did, he couldn't help but wonder if Hall had a death wish. Mazur was reminded of his late friend Scott Fisher, who had died on Mount Everest. When other climbers found Fisher's body, he was partially undressed, with a bare arm sticking out of his unzipped down suit. Mazur knew that it was common for people in the last stages of hypothermia to tear off their clothes, and also that they often acted like tantruming 3-year-olds. Hall was being belligerent and wasn't listening, or perhaps even capable of understanding what was being said. Regardless, Mazur was determined not to let the man they were trying to save end up killing himself. As they struggled to keep Hall from falling off the edge, Mazur shouted to his team, "Anchor him to the mountain. We need to keep him away from the ledge." They quickly drove an ice axe into the snow and secured a strong nylon tether, known as a sling in mountaineering lingo, around him with a figure-8 knot. Once Hall was securely anchored, Mazur quickly radioed down to the team's cook at High Base Camp, telling him to wake up the Seven Summits camp and get them on the radio. "Hurry," he said. 10 minutes later, the head Sherpa on Hall's team came on the radio. "Lincoln Hall is in big trouble and needs your help," Mazur said urgently. There was a long pause before the other person spoke. "You mean he's alive? How alive is he?" Mazur was exasperated. "Well, he's moving around. He's talking," he said. "But we need extra food, water, and oxygen to get him down. Otherwise, he's not going to make it." Mazur insisted that the other person put Hall's leader, Alex Abramov, on the phone. "You've got some guys in high camp, right? Send them up," he told Abramov. The Russian climber agreed to send all the Sherpas he could gather. For hours, Mazur and his team waited anxiously, trying to stay warm by stamping their feet and pacing on the narrow snow-covered ledge. At that point, it was uncertain whether Hall would survive. He was shaking uncontrollably, and his eyes were blinded by the snow. His fingers were so cold they appeared to be made of wax. The team breathed a sigh of relief when 2 Italian climbers appeared on the ledge. Mazur quickly approached them and asked for their help, but to his disappointment, they simply stated that they didn't speak English and continued on their way to the summit. Mazur later saw them at base camp speaking English fluently. All he could say was, "God bless their souls." As the sun rose high in the sky, a dozen Sherpas finally arrived to assist in getting Hall down the mountain. With a skilled guide on either side of him, Hall was able to walk down to the high camp, where he then rode a yak to the base of the mountain. The bumpy ride was made slightly more comfortable by the use of foam sleeping mats as a makeshift saddle. It took 2 days for Mazur and his team to make their way down the mountain. Upon arriving at base camp, they immediately went to visit Hall, who was resting in his tent before embarking on the grueling 100-mile journey to a hospital in Kathmandu. "I hope that after all this, he's a nice guy," Mazur thought. Fortunately, his hopes were not in vain. Despite still being groggy and slurring his words, Hall was able to express his gratitude to Mazur for saving his life. After returning home, Hall has had a series of operations on his fingers and several frostbitten toes. Despite this, he knows that he is lucky to be alive, as he could have easily become the 12th victim of the deadliest season on Everest since 1996. He used the time he spent with his wife and family to write a book. It's not called Dead Lucky for Nothing. The entire experience, Hall says, has changed him profoundly, but in ways he can't yet fully explain. The conversations with his wife are deeper. He sees beauty all around him, and the everyday hassles of life seem insignificant. Unfortunately, just 6 years later, Lincoln Hall died at age of 56 from cancer. Thank you for watching. If you thought this video was interesting, you may also like some of the other videos available on our channel.